The late afternoon sun bathed the pool at Magnolia Creek residences in golden light shimmering off the calm turquoise water. The luxury apartment complex, nestled in the heart of Austin, Texas, was known for its tranquility. But today, something was about to shatter that peace. Sitting on a poolside lounger, Marcus Carter, a 32-year-old software engineer, relished a rare moment of relaxation. His job was relentless, demanding long hours and high-stakes deadlines. But today, for once, he had the luxury of unwinding with a book in one hand and a cold glass of lemonade in the other. The setting was perfect, the gentle splash of water, the distant chatter of other residents, the warm Texas breeze. It was the kind of day Marcus had been craving for weeks. Then, the footsteps came a sharp, deliberate clicking of heels against concrete. Marcus looked up and saw Victoria Langley, a woman in her mid-50s, striding toward him. Her platinum blonde hair was perfectly styled, oversized sunglasses rested on her nose, and her expression carried an unmistakable air of entitlement. He had seen her before, always impeccably dressed, always carrying herself like she owned the place. They had never spoken until now. Victoria stopped in front of him, arms crossed. "Excuse me," she said, her voice sharp, demanding. "Do you live here?" Marcus blinked, caught off guard. "Yes, I do." Her lips pursed as she tilted her head, scrutinizing him from head to toe. "Really?" "Because I've never seen you before." Marcus's muscles tensed. He had encountered people like Victoria before, the ones who believed their assumptions were facts. "I've lived here for 2 years," he replied evenly. Apartment 304. Victoria didn't budge. Instead, she scoffed. "Then you should have your key card. Let's see it." A few people lounging by the pool turned their heads. The tension was palpable now, the air thick with silent anticipation. Marcus inhaled slowly, keeping his voice calm. "I don't have to show you anything. If you have a problem, you can take it up with management." Victoria's face hardened, her cheeks flushing red. "Well, I will," she snapped. She yanked her phone from her designer bag, her movements exaggerated, making sure everyone could see. A few residents exchanged glances, while others subtly reached for their phones, likely recording. Marcus leaned back, forcing himself to remain composed. He wasn't about to let her bait him into an argument, but anger simmered beneath his skin. Victoria's voice rang out across the pool area as she spoke into the phone. "Yes, this is Victoria Langley from Magnolia Creek. There's a suspicious man at the pool. He claims he lives here, but I know he doesn't. I need someone down here immediately." Marcus clenched a jaw. There it was. She hadn't just questioned his presence, she had framed it as a threat. The weight of dozens of eyes bore down on him, some onlookers visibly uncomfortable while others merely spectated. Across the pool, a younger couple whispered to each other, and an older man in swim trunks shook his head slightly, disapproving but unwilling to intervene. No one spoke up. No one stopped her. Victoria turned back to Marcus, her expression triumphant. "This could have been avoided if you'd just shown me your key card," she said smugly, folding her arms. Marcus exhaled through his nose, keeping his tone level. "I don't owe you anything." Her lips curled in distaste. "People like you think you can do whatever you want," she muttered under her breath. Loud enough for those nearby to hear. Marcus stiffened. He knew exactly what she meant by people like you, but he refused to let her words sink their claws into him. Instead, he reached for his book, flipping the page as if she were nothing more than background noise. Minutes later, a uniformed security guard appeared at the pool entrance, his eyes darting nervously between Victoria and Marcus. Victoria waved him over, her expression filled with self-righteous victory. "Thank goodness you're here," she said dramatically. "This man refuses to leave. He claims he lives here, but he won't show proof." The guard approached, clearing his throat. "Sir, do you have your key card with you?" Marcus sighed. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his wallet, and flipped it open, revealing both his key card and his driver's license. The address matched the complex. The guard hesitated, looking between Marcus and Victoria. Then he nodded. "That checks out." He handed the card back. "Sorry for the trouble, sir." Victoria's face twisted in disbelief. "Wait, you're just going to take his word for it." The guard straightened. "Mom," he provided proof. "There's nothing else to discuss." The pool area remained dead silent, and the shift in power was undeniable. Victoria's gaze darted around, seeking validation from the crowd, but she found none. Then, a new voice cut through the tension. Enough is enough. All heads turned. Standing near the edge of the pool was Eleanor Whitman, a woman in her late 60s. She was dressed in a floral sundress and wide-brimmed hat, the very picture of Southern grace. But there was steel in her gaze. Victoria's mouth opened, but Eleanor held up a hand. "Oh, don't act surprised," she said, her voice sharp. "This isn't the first time you've done this." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Eleanor stepped forward, eyes locked onto Victoria. "You've been harassing people in this complex for months. I think it's time someone finally said something." Victoria's face burned red. I don't know what you're talking about." Eleanor scoffed. "Really? Last week you accused the delivery driver of loitering when he was just taking a break in his truck. And let's not forget when you called the cops on those college kids moving in because they look suspicious." A few gasps. Some people nodded in agreement. Victoria swallowed hard. Eleanor's voice softened, but the words carried even more weight. "And now this. Calling security on a man doing nothing wrong just because you don't recognize him. You're embarrassing yourself." For the first time, Victoria looked small. Someone clapped. Then another. And another. The sound grew, a wave of quiet defiance sweeping through the residence. Victoria's hands trembled as she grabbed her bag. "This is absurd," she muttered before storming out of the pool area, her heels clicking furiously against the pavement. The applause faded, replaced by murmurs. Eleanor turned to Marcus, her expression softening. "I'm sorry you had to go through that," she said. "It's not right. And it's not fair." Marcus managed a small smile. "Thank you. I appreciate it." As Eleanor returned to her seat, the crowd slowly dispersed, but the energy in the air lingered. Something had shifted, and it wasn't over yet, because someone had been recording, and the video was already making its way online. Within an hour, the video was everywhere. A younger resident, Lucas Martin, had recorded the entire confrontation and uploaded it to his social media with a caption that read, "This just happened at Magnolia Creek. When will this stop?" At first, it's just a few dozen views, neighbors, friends, people within the complex. But then, something happened that no one expected. The video started gaining traction. Comments flooded in, some from residents of Magnolia Creek, others from complete strangers who had stumbled across the clip. "This is disgusting," one user wrote. "People like Victoria always think they can police who belongs where." Another added, "The way Marcus stayed calm. That's strength. That's dignity." But not everyone was supportive. A few defended Victoria, claiming she was just concerned for safety or misunderstood. Others accused Marcus of overreacting, saying, "Why didn't he just show his key card right away?" This whole thing could have been avoided. But for every negative comment, there were 10 more calling out the deeper issue: racial profiling. Entitlement, the everyday struggles of people who constantly had to prove they belonged. The story was no longer just a neighborhood dispute. It was now a national conversation. By the next morning, news outlets had picked up the video. Headlines ranged from Austin man harassed at his own pool to another case of pool policing sparks debate on bias in America. Reporters reached out to Marcus for statements. He hadn't even processed the situation fully, and now the world wanted to know how he felt about it. Sitting in his apartment, Marcus stared at his phone as notification after notification poured in. Messages from friends, family, coworkers. Some were supportive, others were furious on his behalf. But what stood out the most were the messages from total strangers, people sharing their own stories of being questioned, doubted, and made to feel unwelcome in spaces they had every right to be in. Meanwhile, across the complex, Victoria Langley was in full panic mode. She had never been in a situation like this before. Her name wasn't mentioned in the original video, but it didn't take long for people to figure out who she was. Residents at Magnolia Creek whispered about her in the hallways. Neighbors who once greeted her with polite smiles now looked the other way. But the real damage was happening online. A Twitter thread exposing Victoria's past incidents harassing delivery drivers, calling security on college students moving in, making complaints about suspicious people had gone viral. Screenshots of old social media posts where she had ranted about keeping the neighborhood safe were circulating. Her inbox was flooded with angry messages. Some were calling for her eviction. Others were worse. Victoria tried to defend herself. She posted a statement on her social media. "I was simply looking out for my community. It was never my intention to offend anyone. I was concerned for safety, as any responsible resident should be." But it didn't work. People saw right through it. By the time she walked into the leasing office that afternoon, the property manager, Ms. Delgado, was already waiting. "Victoria, we need to talk," she said, her voice firm but calm. Victoria sat down, her hands gripping her purse tightly. "I assume this is about that ridiculous video," she huffed. Ms. Delgado didn't react to her tone. "I reviewed the footage," she said, folding her hands on the desk. "And I've also received multiple complaints about you. Victoria's twitched complaints. She scoffed. For what? Caring about my community? Miss Delgado exhaled slowly. No, for harassment. She reached for a folder, pulling out a stack of documents. I have reports of you calling security on people who were doing absolutely nothing wrong. A delivery driver who was just eating his lunch. College students moving into their unit. And now Marcus Carter, a resident of 2 years. Victoria's mouth opened, but no words came out. This isn't about community safety, Ms. Delgado continued. This is a pattern. And after what happened yesterday, I have no choice but to issue an official warning. If another complaint is made against you, your lease will be subject to termination. Victoria's face went pale. You can't be serious, she whispered. I am, as Delgado said, standing up. And I suggest you take this time to reflect on how you treat the people around you. As Victoria stormed out of the office, she could feel the stares of the leasing agents, the maintenance staff, even a few residents passing by. For the first time in her life, she was the one being judged, and she hated it. Meanwhile, Marcus was still grappling with his sudden viral fame. He had turned down multiple interview requests, not wanting to be thrust into the spotlight. But then, something unexpected happened. Eleanor Whitman knocked on his door. Marcus, she said warmly, holding out a small plate of cookies. I figured you could use some comfort food. He chuckled, stepping aside to let her in. You didn't have to do that. She waved him off. Of course I did. I've been meaning to check on you. I know all of this must be overwhelming. They sat at his kitchen table, sipping coffee as Eleanor shared her thoughts. You handled yourself with such grace yesterday, she said. And trust me, not everyone would have. Marcus sighed. I wasn't trying to make a statement. I just wanted to enjoy my day. Eleanor nodded. I know. But sometimes we don't get to choose when we become part of something bigger. Marcus leaned back in his chair, staring at his phone. The video now had over 2 million views. News anchors were debating it on morning talk shows. People were demanding justice, accountability, change. He hadn't asked for any of this, but now it seemed unavoidable. Eleanor smiled gently. You don't have to do anything you don't want to, she said. But if you do decide to speak, people will listen. Marcus exhaled slowly, running a hand over his face. I just don't know what I'd even say. Eleanor's gaze was steady. Start with the truth. As she stood to leave, she patted his shoulder. You're not alone in this, Marcus. And whatever you decide, just know that your neighbors, your real neighbors, are behind you. That night, as Marcus lay in bed, he couldn't shake the feeling that this incident was bigger than him. He had spent so much of his life trying to avoid conflict, to blend in, to not be the story. But now he was the story. And the whole world was watching. Meanwhile, Victoria sat alone in her apartment, refreshing her phone over and over. Every new notification made her stomach twist. Her name was now attached to words like racist, entitled, Karen. She thought about packing her bags, maybe moving somewhere new where people didn't know her. But deep down, she knew the truth. No matter where she went, she would always carry this with her. Across Magnolia Creek, the conversations continued. Neighbors who had never spoken before started talking. People who had stayed silent began sharing their own experiences, and for the first time in a long time, the community was changing. But the story wasn't over yet, because the next morning, a national TV host reached out to Marcus, and they wanted him on their show. Marcus sat at his kitchen table, staring at the email on his laptop screen. The subject line read, National Morning Show wants to interview you. His fingers hovered over the keyboard as he reread the message. The producers of Wake Up America wanted him on their show Live. His story had become bigger than he ever imagined, and now the country wanted to hear from him. He exhaled, running a hand over his face. Just days ago, he had been a guy trying to enjoy a peaceful afternoon by the pool. Now, he was a symbol, a talking point, a headline. His phone had been buzzing nonstop, reporters, activists, strangers thanking him for his composure. But not everyone was supportive. There were also the critics. Some accused him of turning a minor misunderstanding into a spectacle. Others defended Victoria, calling her a victim of cancel culture. A few messages were worse, hateful, ugly words from people who didn't want to wax the real issue. But no matter what anyone said, the truth was out there. As Marcus wrestled with what to do next, his doorbell rang. He opened it to find Eleanor Whitman standing there, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee. Thought you might need this, she said with a warm smile. Marcus chuckled, stepping aside to let her in. You always know exactly when to show up. They sat in his living room, the morning sun filtering through the blinds. Eleanor took a sip of her coffee before speaking. So are you going to do it? Marcus sighed. I don't know. I never wanted all this attention. Eleanor nodded. I get that, but this is bigger than you now. Marcus set his cup down. That's the part I'm struggling with. I'm not some activist. I didn't plan for any of this. Eleanor leaned forward, her gaze steady. You don't have to be an activist to tell your story. Just be honest. People need to hear it from you. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. All right, I'll do it. The next morning, Marcus sat in front of a camera in a local news studio. The host of Wake Up America, Lisa Caldwell, greeted him with a warm but professional smile. Marcus, thank you for being here, she said as the segment began. Let's start with the moment at the pool. Walk us through what happened. Marcus recounted the incident, keeping his voice measured but firm. He described the way Victoria had questioned him, how she had assumed he didn't belong, and how security had been called on him for simply getting keys he paid to live in. It wasn't just about me, he said. It's about the fact that this happens all the time to so many people, and most of the time, it doesn't get recorded. Lisa nodded. The video of the incident has been viewed over 5 million times. What do you think it is about this moment that resonated with so many people? Marcus thought for a second before answering. I think people are tired of seeing this kind of thing happen, and I think they're tired of staying silent about it. Lisa then turned to a different angle. Have you heard from Victoria Langley since the incident? Marcus shook his head. No, I haven't. Lisa pursed her lips. She's received a lot of backlash. Some people say she deserves it. Others think this has gone too far. What do you say to that? Marcus exhaled. Look, I'm not here to ruin anyone's life, but actions have consequences. If this had been a one-time mistake, maybe things would be different. But from what I understand, this wasn't the first time she's treated people like this. The interview continued, touching on racial profiling, community accountability, and what needs to change moving forward. By the time it ended, Marcus felt lighter. He hadn't asked for this platform, but now that he had it, he wanted to use it for something meaningful. Meanwhile, at Magnolia Creek, Victoria Langley sat alone in her apartment, watching the interview on TV. She had barely left her unit in days. The stares, the whispers, the complete collapse of her once pristine reputation, it was more than she could handle. She wasn't just disliked now, she was isolated. Her inbox was flooded with messages. Some were from old friends offering sympathy. Others were from total strangers, calling her out for everything she had done. The worst part was that no matter how much she tried to justify it to herself, a small part of her knew the truth. She had been wrong. She had spent years seeing herself as the protector of Magnolia Creek, the self-appointed gatekeeper of who belonged and who didn't. But now, she was the one who was unwelcome, and she didn't know if she could fix that. A week later, something unexpected happened. At the urging of Eleanor and some other neighbors, Marcus decided to host a community gathering at the complex, a barbecue, open to all residents. The idea was simple: bring people together, start conversations, and rebuild trust where it had been broken. The turnout was better than anyone expected. Families brought dishes, kids played games, and people who had once been strangers sat together, talking, laughing, connecting. Eleanor moved through the crowd, her laughter ringing out as she chatted with residents young and old. And then, as Marcus was flipping burgers at the grill, something caught his eye. Victoria. She stood at the edge of the courtyard, hesitating. She looked different, not as put together as usual. There was no arrogance in her posture, no self-righteousness in her gaze, just uncertainty. For a long moment, Marcus considered ignoring her. But then he took a breath and walked toward her. I didn't expect to see you here, he said evenly. Victoria swallowed. I almost didn't come. Marcus studied her carefully. So why did you? Victoria looked around at the gathering, at the people she had once seen as outsiders but who now stood together as a real community. I don't know, she admitted. Maybe because I didn't want to be on the outside anymore. Marcus didn't respond right away. Then he motioned toward the food table. There's plenty to eat if you're hungry. Victoria's eyes widened slightly, as if she hadn't expected the offer. She hesitated, then nodded. Thank you. As she walked toward the food, Marcus exhaled, turning back to the grill. Eleanor approached, nudging him with her elbow. That was big of you, she said. Marcus smirked. Don't make a big deal out of it. Eleanor chuckled. Too late. As the night went on, something shifted at Magnolia Creek. The barriers, both spoken and unspoken, that had divided people began to fade. The pool incident had been ugly, painful, unfair. But in a strange way, it had also forced people to see each other differently. Not just as neighbors in the same complex, but as humans flawed, learning, growing. Marcus had never wanted to be the center of a viral moment. But now, as he looked around at the people coming together, he realized something. Change wasn't always comfortable, but sometimes it was necessary. The story of Magnolia Creek isn't just about one heated confrontation, it's about something much bigger. It's about the silent battles so many people fight every day. How often are people judged, questioned, or excluded simply because they don't fit someone else's idea of who belongs? How many moments of dignity are stolen by assumptions, prejudice, and unchecked entitlement? But here's the truth: silence enables injustice. If no one had spoken up for Marcus, if Eleanor hadn't stepped forward, if that video had never been shared, nothing would have changed. It takes courage to challenge what's wrong, to break the cycle of quiet complicity. And sometimes that courage starts with just one voice saying, enough is enough. Community is not built on exclusion, it's built on understanding. Magnolia Creek didn't just need better rules, it needed better people willing to listen, to grow, to admit when they were wrong. Change isn't easy. It's uncomfortable, but it's necessary. So ask yourself, where do you stand? When the moment comes to choose between looking away or speaking up, will you have the courage to make a difference? Because the world doesn't change on its own. It changes when people decide to stand up and demand something better.